Good evening, everyone. We are live now for our Bible study. When you are over, just go ahead and tell me hello so I know that you all can hear me clearly now. And thank you, Sister Teresa. I see that you are on the line. Those who are logging back over, just say hello and that the sound is a little bit better now. Thank you, Sister Philippa. We'll give everyone a few more moments to let them know that we are officially on. And we are going to finish our study. Thank you all. Hey there, Sister Kelani. So we had some when I was taping, I was using my cell phone, so that was a little bit difficult. But now I'm on the laptop. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Let's just have a word of prayer. Our Father and our God, we thank you for another opportunity. We thank you, oh God, for the time that we are having, studying, learning relationships and how we grow better in our relationships that we have with our brothers and our sisters. But God, that we continue to strengthen our relationship with you. We ask right now that you just bless us and touch us as we begin managing church conflict. This we ask in your name. Thank God. Amen. So tonight we're doing chapter 2, managing church conflict, and really this was a really good chapter that Hugh Halverstad had, written about, rethinking gut theologies in conflict. We have to understand that we have our own personal beliefs, our own ways of doing things, and Hugh is really starting to say how we should really dive into rethinking some of the ways we act. And so in the first chapter, and like I said, this was not a very long chapter, but there are some critical pieces in the chapter that are so important that a lot of times we have conflict. Good evening, Mother White and Sister Kathy. I just want to say good evening, everyone. Thanks for logging back over to the Bible study. What points out, and we're going to start on page 21 if you have your book. Conflict arises, and how we deal with conflict really has a history. And what I mean by that history is that how we were raised really has a lot to do how we handle the conflict that we come encounter with. And so what Hugh says to us, it says, this is one line that was the whole book is great, but there's one line in this book that I think really gets to the root and crux of things. One's feelings are undeniably evidence that one's childhood experiences are still at play. How we handle some of the conflicts that we are faced with and how we react to them really stems from how we were raised as children. He goes on to say that we handle conflict based on the things that happen in our childhood, how we were raised. Our first conflicts happened with siblings, our parents, our aunts, our uncles, our cousins, and how we responded to that really has gauged how we respond to other conflicts that arise for us right now. So it's very, very critical to really understand how you were raised as a child. And to see, in the first lady said this a couple weeks ago in Sunday school, that's, when you're around your family, you sort of realize how much you are like them. And that's what happens really when we are dealing with conflict. But what's so powerful is when you're dealing with conflict, if you are able, which you should be, studying and praying and doing what God has commanded you to do, you should be becoming more like him. And if you are becoming more like him, you are able to deal with the conflicts that are thrown at your face. Dr. Halstead goes on to talk about this evening about how Jesus was faced with adversity, faced with conflict, and how he dealt with conflict with Pilate and the Sanhedrin. He talked about how Jesus was able to manage conflict. And so that is very encouraging to all of us this evening, is how we operate in the midst of conflict. But in order for us to really resolve the conflicts that we really have to get to the root of what bothers us. Now, a lot of us don't want to talk about our childhood. We don't want to talk about the issues that happen in our house, because some of us are taken to a dark place. Others have great moments in their childhood, and have no problems talking about their household when they were growing up. But you really start to see how you operate is how you grew up and how you dealt with the conflict with your siblings and so forth and so on. I remember when I was, a young child, my great grandmother, Mother Holly, used to take someone food every Sunday, and we had to go to this woman's house every Sunday. And my great grandmother would have me go into the house to deliver the food. And I was like, I am tired of going into this house every Sunday, because when I got into the house, the woman would talk and I would be trying to get out to go back to the car, but she would just continue to talk. And I realized in that moment, the conflict that I was having was, why am I getting so upset about going to give to someone who is in need? And I had to really sit, even as a young person, understand, why am I getting so angry? Now, people could say, you're lazy at the time, you're just being contrary to what your great grandmother wants. But it really was, well, why are we giving something to someone? And God really revealed to me that you have to do for others, because you never know when you're going to be in a situation where you need someone to do something for you to help you out. And at that very moment, every Sunday, I would be very happy to go in to speak to this sister, to give her this food, because it was an opportunity. Although I thought it was a conflict because I didn't want to do it, it was an opportunity for me to minister, because when I would get to take the food to her, the first question she would ask is, what was the sermon about? And that really made me pay attention in church and really understand that I now am getting some food from the pastor to now go minister to someone who stands in need. So even out of the midst of that conflict that I thought I was having with myself and with my grandmother, God was able to use me in ministry. And so tonight, he was telling us the same thing, that in the midst of conflict is an opportunity for ministry. It's an opportunity for you to speak encouragement. It's an opportunity for you to speak life. It's an opportunity for you to resolve the issue that's going on. We have a tendency to believe that when we're in conflict, that we always have to win the argument, that we have to be the last person standing, that we have to really give it to the person and make our point. But no, it's an opportunity to minister, to say that even when I'm faced with adversity, even when I'm faced with this conflict, I'm going to look and depend on the God that is within me to handle and to resolve this conflict. And a lot of times, conflict in the church, we have problems that arise and we never want to get to the root of why we have the issue. And in chapter 2 tonight, it's really discussing that we have the issue because we don't want to speak the truth to why we're really upset. You have to be able and willing to speak to that person or persons to tell them exactly why you are upset. And when you are conveying to them why you are upset, you are both working out a solution that is really going to resolve it. And when you resolve it, don't continue to go back to it as to add fuel to the fire, but extinguish the fire because you have resolved the conflict. We are really faced with that when we are in conflict, we are so consumed in our feelings that we do not want to hear the other side. We don't want to listen to their point of view. We don't want to listen to the resolution that they may have come up with. We don't even want to listen to the actual things that offended them that we did. We don't want to do it. We want to sit in our feelings and not address the actual problems. And that's really how conflict starts. Is that a lot of times we are in our feelings. We are offended for some reason, and we never want to articulate why we are offended. And that's a problem, because if you don't address the underlying issue, it starts to manifest into a lot of different things. It manifests into poor relationships, poor work habits. It manifests into health issues. It manifests into anger and to jealousy and to being self-absorbed, because we never want to get to the underlying issue. And as I said in the very beginning, a lot of these issues that we have, it does stem from our childhood, that we have never addressed the issue that we were dealing with as children. And now what it has done is become an adult, but we never have resolved the issues that are bothering us. And that is really what a lot of conflict in the church stems from, because we have a belief system that we are right and that whatever we say has to go. And when we don't like to receive criticism. We don't like to receive feedback. We want to be right all the time. And when that occurs, when you don't want to listen to others and you believe you have all the answers, guess what's going to happen? Conflict. Conflict will arise, and it will happen all the time. So it's important that when a conflict does arise and you know that you have an issue, you go to the person and you say, you know what, this is what's bothering me. This is how I am feeling about the situation. How can we resolve it? We may not agree on everything, but we need to resolve it so that we can push forward, because at the end of the day, what we are doing is kingdom building. We are doing the work that God has called us to do. We have to get outside of ourselves and make sure that we are concentrating on what the Lord is doing. You also have to know your feelings. You have to know your feelings and be able to articulate that. If you're angry, say you're angry. Don't say, oh, I'm happy, when you're walking around with a facial expression that says otherwise. When you're hurt, say you're hurt. When you are isolated, say you're isolated. When you feel that your idea has been rejected, say, I feel that I have been rejected. Speak the actual problem out instead of bottling it up and not saying what the issue is. If you feel that you have been just slighted in the wrong way, that you don't feel valued or appreciated by anyone, and you continue to do all this work and no one's recognizing you, and you feel that you're doing all this and you feel like you're being abused and beat up, but you never say anything. You walk around as though everything's okay, but as soon as someone says hi to you, you're automatically on a defense and you begin to snap at the person because you have never addressed the actual feeling that has bothered you. We have to say what actually offends us. And because the other person or other people do not know what offends you unless you tell them. And how can they resolve a conflict that they know nothing about if you have never articulated the actual issue that's bothering you? And that was we were talking about just in relationships. In a relationship, you have to be able to communicate effectively so that the other person has the opportunity to resolve or to get better. But if you never tell them what's going on, there's no way for the conflict to be resolved. And a lot of times in the church, we see this time and time again because we have so much love for everyone, as we should. We just say, oh, I'll deal with it. Oh, I'll let it go. And then we let it go for a month. We let it go for 2 months. We let it go for a year, 5 years, 10 years. But then we get to the point, well, I don't like sister so-and-so. I don't like brother so-and-so. I won't serve on that committee because brother so-and-so or sister so-and-so serves on that committee, because we never articulated the feeling that we were hurt, that we were rejected, that we felt that our ideas didn't matter. We never went and told that person. So they kept on with the same type of behavior because we never we're able to address our feelings. And what Hugh says early in the chapter is that a lot of times we don't address our feelings because when we were younger, we were growing up in a household, our siblings or our parents dismiss some of our feelings, they dismiss our opinion, they dismiss those things, and we start to harbor anger, and we never have gotten past that. So now that we are adults and we are in working and we're in the church, we have still subconsciously put ourselves into that child place and not wanting to address anyone, because once we address someone, conflict happens. So if I'm angered, you angered me, but I don't tell you because I don't want the conflict to happen. But then I start acting angry about every single thing. That is going to make a larger conflict. You have to be willing and able to address what's going on. I am just so happy about this because although we're in the virtual setting, we still have conflict in the church. The conflict comes out in the virtual setting. We come out with our body language and what we say and how we attack people. And you think you are crafting it that people are not understanding the attack, but the attack is happening. And so I implore all of us, when you are offended, when you are faced with a conflict or adversity in church, don't become silent. Speak up and say what you did offended me. And the person may not know they did it, or they will explain, I don't believe that's the case, but you know what? Now that you have brought it to my attention, I will work harder to address the issue. So managing conflict is very difficult. Having a relationship is very difficult, but this all comes into play. So again, he goes on and he tells a story about a pastor. He tells a story about a young man who grew up, who was raised by his grandmother or his grandparents, and he has a woman pastor, and the woman pastor gets up and he feels as though the woman pastor is arrogant and insulting his intelligence. And he sat down and he said, why am I getting so upset with the pastor? This is an example that's in the book. He said, why am I getting so upset with the pastor? And he came to the realization that he was getting upset with the pastor because how he was raised, the grandmother never believed in having a woman pastor. So he has started to internalize those types of beliefs. And so every time the pastor would get up, he would not listen to anything she had to say. And then he sat down and said, but I'm missing out on my blessing because I'm so caught up in the past on the beliefs of my grandmother instead of actually finding out who I am. Finding out who I am in Christ so that I'm able to manage the conflict. So he goes back and he talks to the pastor and he takes an inventory on himself. He takes an inventory on himself to realize, I'm the one who actually has the issue. And in order for me to be able to hear the word of God come out of this vessel, I had to figure out what's going on. And he went to the root. He went to the root. And when he went to the root, he was able to hear God speaking. You got to be able to go to the root. I see some comments, and I got to put my glasses on so I can see it. So the first lady says, what happens when the person doesn't think they did anything wrong? That happens a lot of times because, again, as I said earlier, we think we're so self-absorbed. We really do believe that we don't do anything wrong. But I think if the person who is the one who's offended goes to someone, you got it. Although you may not believe, you need to receive it and actually pray on it because God will reveal to you what you have done. And that happens a lot of times. You got to be able to, you're right, check yourself and ask God to change you. A lot of times we don't want to change we don't want to change because we like where we are. And we don't want to address the actual issue. We don't want to go to the root. We don't want to go to the root because we're happy where we are. We're happy in the conflict. And if I can cause problem all the time, I'm okay with that. And some people really do believe that. They are okay with always being in a conflict. And that is so absurd, but it goes back to if there was conflict when you were growing up and there was always tension in the household, you start to internalize that. So now that's how you see relationships is a conflict. And when we started a relationship conversation a few weeks ago, I said what was so important to me is that I was able to see relationships, not and no relationship is perfect, but you see the work that both people put into the relationship. And it's the same thing with conflict. Both parties have to be have shared interests to resolve it. And that's where it has to come to. You have to sit down and really reason together to figure out what the problem is. So we go on to the other part of this chapter. And he goes on to say, but until one identifies one's early learnings about conflict, one cannot accurately assess a current situation in which one is having feelings. So what he was saying tonight, if you don't go and identify the actual problem that you have learned, it's a learned behavior, you're not going to be able to accurately assess a current situation. If you feel that you always are under attack for whatever reason, you're not willing to address it, you're never going to be able to have the situation. So Sister Phyllis says, what happens when neither person is right? It's not about what we learn in this book. It's not always going to be a win-win situation. That's not how you're necessarily going to resolve the conflict. It has to be, the person has to understand, whether you're right or wrong, you have to understand the person where they're coming from. Not if they're right or if they're wrong, but to get an understanding. Because when you have an understanding of someone or where they're coming from, it may not be a win or lose or a win-win or a lose-lose, but what it is, it's an understanding that there's an actual issue. A lot of times we want to ignore that there's an issue. It's not about being right or wrong, but we have to recognize that there is an issue. And that's where the hard conversations come in, that you have to recognize that there's a problem. That's really what we have to do. And a lot of times we don't want to have those conversations because we're so afraid that we're going to offend someone. And you might offend the person, but you have to be able to say that we have a real conflict that's going on and we need to address it. Thank you, Sister Phil. That was a good question. So it goes on to talk about gut theology. Gut theology, and this goes on what Sister Phil was just talking about, whether neither person is right or wrong. We have what he was talking about, gut theology, when we acquire that we are rarely wrong. We believe in our gut that we're always right. And that is what he is dismissing tonight, that what you believe in your gut is not right. What God tells you is what's right. We are taught, take your gut feeling, do your gut feeling, but your gut feeling is not always the best. And we've all been in situations where I'm going with my gut, and your gut landed you in some places you shouldn't have been. So your gut feelings are wrong. We acquired that they are wrong. So gut theologies also go back to painful or dreadful experiences he talks about tonight. So he also goes on to say, and I thought that I was able to see this book, but this print is pretty small, that what I thought was another good point in this book about when he was talking about gut theologies. It was, and this is really what I want to hone in on tonight. And it's like I said, it was not a very long chapter. But in order to resolve conflict, you have to have creative negotiations rather than irrational. This is on page 25, irrational power plays. That was so powerful. This comes to the crux of where a lot of conflict happens. We want to be the person that wins, and we will do anything we can to fight dirty to win the conflict, or at least perceive that we have won the conflict, because that's how church issues happen. We've got to be the last person that had the last word and say that we won the argument. But if we come up with creative negotiations, that in negotiations, everyone does not get what they want. But what you start out, the starting principle of negotiation is to go over what the shared interests are. Where do you come into agreement? And if you can come into agreement, then you are able to come up with the final solution, as Sister Mandy just said. So it's about being creative to resolve the conflict. It's not about Brother Maurice is right and Sister Mandy's wrong, or Sister Mandy's right and Brother Maurice is wrong. No, it's about, okay, we recognize, the two of us recognize there's a conflict. So how can we creatively resolve it? By doing the work that God has called us to do, and to realize that it's not about an irrational power play. We get caught up in the power plays that we want to be the end all be all. We want to be the head of the organization, the final say, everything. And then we don't get the work done because we're going to so many lengths just to be in charge, and we're not actually solving the problem. I'm telling you, that line of this book, of this chapter, was so profound. I really, as a pastor says, I had to sit back in my chair and really say, God, what are you telling me here? Is that we have a tendency as a culture to really believe that someone has to be the one who, I'm in the power, I made the decision, I'm right. But no, this is saying, I want you to come up with a solution. I want you to be creative to say there are some deficiencies on both sides, but there is an amicable resolution that can happen if you sit down together, and not be on an even level playing field to do the work. And that's what we're talking, and we're keeping this in the context, as this book is, of managing church conflict. It's not about the organization that can outraise. It's not about the organization that can plan the better party. It's not about the organization that has more membership in the church. It's about resolving and doing the work that God has called us to do. There are many issues in this world. There are many people who don't know Jesus. And we're sitting in the church, in the four walls, fighting each other. When we actually have work, we have to learn about him, so that when we learn about him, we can go out and teach someone to bring them in. And in order for us to do that, we have to learn how to get along. We have to learn how to say, brother or sister, you have offended me. But we need to work out a solution, because we really have some kingdom building to do. And this is what the crux of managing church conflict is that yes, you are going to be faced with conflicts. Yes, you will be faced with challenges. Yes, you will be faced with arguments, and you may not like each other for a few moments. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that we have work to do. We have serious problems, and we need to work hard to make sure that we're going out there doing the building that God has called us to do. You can't get into a place when you get into a conflict that you want to quit every other week, that you get mad with every person, that you don't want to talk to people for 5 or 6 months. And you have to, and if you get to that place, you have to say to yourself, why am I there? And I need to go to the person that has offended me, or I offended myself, because that happens a lot of time, and say, I need to work on me to get to the right place. I know conflict is hard. It's not easy. When you have two opposite views on how things should operate, conflict happens. When you have people, conflict happens. Not even people. Like I said, the example last week you had about the dogs, the pastor's dogs. There were some adjustments that had to be made with Reese because he hadn't been in the house the longest, but he made the adjustment. And I'm saying we have to make the adjustment in our lives for us to be better. That yes, you're going to be faced with a lot, but you have to make the adjustment. And so lastly tonight, that I want to read this part in the book on page 26 about Jesus. And he said Jesus in the conflict was assertive. Nothing wrong with being assertive. He said Jesus was assertive rather than a victim of. his earthly circumstances. He made choices within the limitations of these circumstances. His choices demonstrated the true humility and not helplessness, but assertiveness. We learn from him that our power consists in knowing we cannot control our circumstances, but we can make choices in response to them. That is what we have the power to do. That we are faced with a lot of different things, a lot of circumstances and a lot of limitations, but we have choices. And Jesus made those choices. Jesus, in the midst of the situations that he was in, he knew that he had work that he had to do. And he did not stop doing what he had to do, but he was assertive in his purpose. He was assertive because he knew what he had to do. And we are all called for a purpose. And we cannot let the conflict, the limitations stop us from doing the work that God has called us to do. And that is so important that I hope tonight that you all are reading this book, because I'm telling you, you're going to be faced with conflict. You will be faced with a lot of different things, but hold fast and know that God is truly, truly moving for all of us. So I thank you tonight. I hope that next week that you read chapter 3 of the book. It's a very, it's a good book. I mean, it really is good. It really helps you really recognize that a lot of times we are the problem. We are the problem. And we sometimes have to realize how we talk to people. And we also need to, when we hear someone say something to us, we cannot take everything so personal that we're not able to do the work that God has called us to do. So we need to be able to accept criticism and feedback, but also tell the person when they have offended us. So I hope that tonight that God bless you as he blessed me with this book by Hugh Halverstad. We thank him for writing this his book. And I thank the pastor and the first lady for the opportunity to teach. And I thank you for the time that we spent together listening. And if you have questions about this chapter, feel free to, as the pastor said, put it in the comment section. I'll answer it next week. And if you come next week, prepare to have questions for chapter 3. So I love all of you, and I hope to see you next week. God bless each and every one of you.